Hi, everyone. My name is Jeff Tomlinson. I'm an occupational therapist, and I will be the coordinator for this course, older adults. Um, a little bit about my background. I have been a practicing occupational therapist for over 42 years now, primarily in uh, mental health for adults with serious mental health conditions, but I have also worked for many years in with older adults. First in nursing homes, I think in two different nursing homes, and as well as doing some coverage in other nursing homes. And then I've also worked in home care, and I've done a little bit of work in day programs for the elderly. So, and on top of all that, I'm adjunct faculty at NYU in Columbia, and my volunteer work is as the Legislative and Government Relations Coordinator for the New York State Occupational Therapy Association. So that's a little bit about me. You'll be seeing me in person on the first day of class in the afternoon. Um, but this is my lecture for the first half, or the second half of today's lecture. So let's see if I got that. Yep. Okay. That's not quite what I had in mind. Let's see. Beginning. Okay. So I've asked Dr. Mahoney for the opportunity to talk about the public policy and advocacy part, and that will include the meaningful occupations in later life. All of it are areas that I have a great passion for and had some experience in. Um, so I'll talk a little bit to this material today. Um, so much of this is based. This first part is based on Bonder's book, chapters 3 and 5, that hopefully you'll take the time to read. So the impact of public policy on older adults in current day. There's a video on it that I hopefully you'll take a chance to take some time to read or to watch. The video is 27 minutes long, but please take a look at it. I think it has some worthwhile discussion of how public policy has a huge impact on the safety and the quality of life of older adults in the United States. So, so what are we taking away from the reading on social isolation and loneliness? Hopefully you've done that reading. This is a huge issue in the United States today. Not just for the elderly. We're seeing it across the lifespan. Um, you know, um, but it has a big effect on the quality of social relationships. Have a big impact on person's health. We there's more and more research coming out that shows that um, isolation and loneliness are huge factors um, on how people do later on in life. Um, nearly, um, how can we identify individuals who are socially isolated if they do not belong to any community groups, have unstable housing, and do not have any significant personal relationships? Nearly all persons who are 50 years of age or older interact with the same healthcare system in some way, regardless of where they fall on the social isolation or loneliness continuum. And so this interaction with the healthcare system may serve as an important touch point for identifying um, the older adults who are living in isolation and who are experiencing loneliness. So that makes the physicians and occupational therapists and other healthcare providers a significant touch point in helping to identify people that might be struggling with this issue. It's a both are kind of an underappreciated public health risk. Um, Approximately one quarter or 24% of community dwelling Americans age 65 and older are considered to be socially isolated. And a significant portion of adults in the United States report feeling 35% of adults aged 45 and older and 43% of adults aged 60 and older report feeling loneliness. Social isolation and loneliness can be chronic or it can be episodic. So that's important to keep in mind also. It's incorrect to assume that all older adults are isolated or lonely. Rather, older adults are at increased risk for socialization and loneliness because they are more likely to face a lot of predisposing factors such as living alone, the loss of family or friends, chronic illness, and sensory impairments. And we'll talk about that a little bit more. The demographic trends contribute to social isolation, increase in the number of people living alone. In the United States in general, we're seeing an increase, right? As of July 2023, this year, 13% of adults live alone. Over the last 50 years, the marriage rate has dropped by nearly 60%. So we're seeing more and more isolation in our communities. Higher rates of childlessness with couples or with individuals, and a decreased amount of community involvement. This is something as a volunteer that we're in organizations we're extremely aware of, that less and less people are volunteering or engaging in religious affiliations that would have provided them with community contacts, with interpersonal contacts that would be enriching and rewarding for older adults. And so that trend is contributing to the social isolation. Mediators are considered the mechanisms or pathways for why people are in isolation. The factors that help explain how social isolation or loneliness affects health outcomes. The moderators are the factors that can influence the magnitude or direction of the effect of socialization and loneliness on health. The extent to which an individual is socially connected takes a multifactorial approach. It's not just one simple issue, right? Structure aspects connects to other via the existence of relationship and their roles, right? So the structural aspects of marital status, social networks, social integration, living alone, social isolation. The functional aspects such as receiving support, perceptions of social support, and perceived loneliness have an impact in social relations. And then the qualitative or the quality, the positive and negative aspects of social relationships, the marital quality, the relationship strain, and social inclusion or exclusion in social circles. So all of these have a big impact on social functioning and in the sense of social connection. Okay. The next video we want you to take a look at is Joe. This is the link for that video. And we're going to apply different lessons to this case as we go through the 5-minute video. All right. So what setting is Joe? Some of the questions to ask yourself is what setting is Joe in? Um, you see she has dementia. Does this mean she has Alzheimer's? And does this mean that she shouldn't be getting therapy? Is that a question that she shouldn't be getting therapy? Okay, so now to policy, um, public policy and healthcare. Um, Policy reflects a lot of our values in society and the beliefs that we have about what we value in this country. In most developed countries, there's some form of universal health coverage. In much of Europe and so on, in Canada, United Kingdom, and so forth. In the United States, we have a smattering of insurance programs. There's three laws that Bonder um, identifies that are most salient to the health of older adults: Medicare, Medicaid, and Older Americans Act. So Medicare was not enacted in this country until 1965. Um, is paid in part by worker-employer contributions. So we all, as we're working, money is withdrawn from our check um, and set aside to pay for Medicare insurance, in part by insurance type premiums. Universal coverage for those over 65 and for individuals with disabilities is the policy. Part A is for hospitalization, skilled nursing home care, home health care, and hospice. Part B is supposed to be more physician and other healthcare providers, including occupational therapy, physical therapy, speech therapy. Part C is a special program that Congress designed called Medicare Advantage plans, and we'll go into that a little bit more. And then Part D has been the most recent program, and that's been regarding prescription medication. So it's designed to provide financial assistance for those at risk for requiring a moderate to high level of medical care. Medicare is multi-generational, and workers put into the system through payroll deductions, as I was saying before. So Medicare coverage is the largest single payer of healthcare services in the United States. 60 over As of March of this year, it was over 65.7 million people were covered by Medicare. It influences the provisions of other health insurance plans because of its size and its scope. And I would add the work that is done by the Medicare program to examine evidence-based practice in healthcare really contributes significantly to national coverage determination policies and local coverage policies. And those decisions are closely followed by commercial insurance plans, and it affects their policies quite often. The eligibility for coverage is at least 65. You have to be 65 or older. You have to have been a United States citizen or a permanent resident for at least 10 years. You have to paid in Medicare taxes for at least 40 years or be permanently disabled, even if not 65. You could be permanently disabled and draw from Medicare. So Medicare and therapy. Medicare is the primary source of payment for older adults, as we mentioned. It has a different type. Parts A, B, and C are relevant to OT, PT, and therapy coverage. Right? Part A, to be eligible for coverage, a person must be 65 again, U.S. citizen, all that. Individuals under 65 are eligible if they are permanently disabled, received Social Security disability benefits or payments for at least the previous 2 years, received Social Security disability benefits for ALS, or need continuous dialysis or kidney transplant. So there's some carve out for a specific diagnosis. The beneficiary will have experienced an acute medical crisis requiring hospitalizations, followed by a lesser level of inpatient care in a skilled nursing facility. That's what triggers the Medicare Part A is a hospitalization. And I believe the hospitalization has to be for at least 3 days. And so that sometimes gets into issues of how long the patient has been in the hospital, how much time they spent in the emergency room, and then how much time they were admitted to the floor. So that gets into some difficulties. The hospital benefits cover acute illnesses, diseases, or surgical care, typically for just a few days. Hospital and SNF benefits include room and board and medically necessary professional services such as therapy services that must meet program requirements for Medicare. When the beneficiary no longer needs the services provided in the hospital, they've reached goals specific to the care setting or has exhausted their benefits, additional therapy services can be provided in the home. So you'll see sometimes patients who have exhausted their benefits being quickly discharged to home care so that they can get the services in the home. Co-pays and other out-of-pocket expenses are part of the plan and can be a significant cost to lower income elderly people. Hospice care is covered completely. Skilled nursing facility coverage is for up to 100 days for rehabilitation. Therapy services are included and help determine the level of reimbursement. So there's a formula that the nursing homes have to apply to as far as level of care and the amount of therapy provided influences that formula and the amount of reimbursement. But you'll also see in nursing homes that 100 days will be monitored very closely, and there'll be plans made to discharge the patient as they're reaching that 100 days. Because if it goes past that 100 days, you get into other complexities as far as coverage, which might include a spend down, which we'll get to in a few slides. So regarding coinsurance, there's no coinsurance for days 1 through 20. There's coinsurance that could be up to $200 a day from days 20 to 100. And then after day 100, you pay the full amount. So that's why the 100-day for rehab is a significant number, a significant countdown as to when the patient needs to be ready for discharge usually. Medicare Part B is supposed to be mostly outpatient care, but it includes a lot of different facilities. It includes diagnostic, therapeutic, and preventative medical services, health-related professional services, including durable medical equipment, prosthetics, and orthotics. The beneficiaries usually pay roughly 25% co-insurance of the cost. It covers the services for independent OTs, PTs, and speech pathologists, as well as outpatient therapy services in hospitals, skilled nursing facilities, rehabilitation agencies, doctor's office, therapist's office, CORFs, comprehensive outpatient rehab facilities, or home and home health care agency or therapist private practice, right? So it's quite comprehensive in what it covers, and is a big part for occupational therapy practice. One of the interesting stories in Part B is the Jimmo versus Sebelius case, and there was actually another court case that challenged the eligibility for coverage for Medicare services for therapy. Previously, before these lawsuits were settled, um, Medicare was applying throughout the country was applying a progress standard for therapy services. In other words, the therapist had to document that the patient was making significant measurable progress from therapy. Um, and so that was challenged in the courts, and it was revealed that there was nothing in the laws that that provided for the government to impose this progress standard. And so that has been struck down and cannot be applied to the review of whether therapy is covered or not. So now the standard has shifted to the need for skilled nursing or therapy services. And I can tell you, in my experience, I haven't been in a nursing home or home care for a couple of years, but the last I saw, therapists were still having difficulty making this mind shift away from progress standards. We've been working under progress standard requirements for so long that people still subconsciously were still applying it to their practice and to their discussions with patients and with families. The skilled nursing or skilled therapy services is an interesting standard. In other words, you have to document in your paperwork, in your progress notes and so forth, that you are providing a skilled therapy service intervention that can't be provided by anyone else. That can't be provided by the family. That can't be provided by the therapy aide or or a certified nurse assistant or a home health aide. It's got to be something, a skill that only can come from an educated and licensed occupational therapist, physical therapist, or speech therapist, right? And so that has to be carefully documented, and I'm sure you'll get more about that in this program. Um, what else was I going to say about that? But that and so let's see. To be considered skilled therapy, the services must be of a level of complexity and sophistication that they require the skills of a qualified therapist and be reasonable and necessary for the treatment of the patient's condition. So that's an added component to it. So the question for class: do you think the benefit from this policy shift? Which populations would benefit? ALS, MS, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, diabetes, hypertension, arthritis, heart disease, and stroke are all potential populations that may benefit from this kind of shift a little bit more. So some of these populations will not show as much progress, but they will need skilled services. So one very simple example is sometimes occupational therapists will do resistive exercises with a patient to try to um, do increased strengthening of the upper extremities and the hands and stuff like that. Is that really truly skilled therapy? How is it skilled therapy? Why isn't it something that the therapist could design a home exercise program for and teach the aide to administer this exercise program and then discharge occupational therapy? So that's one of the questions that are posed to therapists all the time. Isn't this something that could be trained, and handed over to an aide? Okay, so now Medicaid. Medicaid was enacted in that following year in 1966 during the Johnson administration, and it's supposed to be coverage for indigent individuals of any age. It also covers some much long-term care, not some, but much long-term care, and for the older adults. Um, it's a combination of federal and state insurance. In the ratio varies from state to state. Has changed a little bit during um, the Affordable Care Act. Um, But there is a play between the federal and state payment and so on for Medicaid programs. It's primarily for chronic conditions that could lead to institutional residence, being institutionalized, like in a nursing home. It can pay for options such as self-pay for long-term care insurance, but for those who do not have any personal resources, Medicaid will step in. Let's go on to see. So again, it's a joint federal state program. Individuals need to satisfy both federal and state requirements regarding residency, immigration status, or citizenship. Um, it's moving more and more toward the HMO type of plans, away from a fee for service, more to a managed care model of administering Medicaid programs, more and more by states. Um, and there's concern sometimes for the spouse who remains in the community. If the individual, the patient, is admitted to a nursing home and is applying for Medicaid to cover the services once Medicare has run out, or if Medicare didn't cover it all, in order to qualify for Medicaid coverage, the patient has to have a minimal amount of resources, financial resources available to them. And that can even get into material resources such as the home and stuff, as well as bank accounts, um, stock investments, all kinds of stuff can be considered as disqualifying a patient from being able to have Medicaid coverage. So sometimes though it can create a crisis situation in which a patient has been hospitalized, transferred to a nursing home, and not going to be able to return home, but they still have a surviving spouse living in their house and dependent on that home for their for their security, and yet now all of a sudden you get into a spend down situation for in order to qualify for Medicaid. That and the savings account, all the money's been saved to provide for the spouse can be eaten up by the nursing home very quickly in order for the patient to become qualified for Medicaid. There's a look back period for this also. So if sometimes families will try to rearrange their bank accounts and get rid of financial resources before they apply for Medicaid. Most states, I believe, have like a 5-year look back period. So as people are getting older, they need to, this is one of the things they need to do, is do some financial planning about how to manage their resources so that they don't get into the spend down situation and lose a lot of their savings dramatically in a very quick manner. So that's something as we get older, older adults have to think about prospectively. What are they going to do financially? Individuals need to satisfy both federal and state requirements. We've gone over that. Long-term care coverage is available only to those who have no financial resources, right? So here's the slide. There's a 60-month look-back period. In New York, it's 30 for community-based long-term care, 30 months. So, but either way, you want to tell people over 65 to really start planning. It's hard because people don't anticipate the healthcare crisis often, and they tend to think that everything's going to be all right until things aren't. And so it's important to think about this in advance. So let's go back to Joe. What possible insurance coverage does Joe have? And what is your reasoning on that? What do you think Joe might have as far as insurance? Okay. The Older Americans Act was also passed in 1965. It covers a variety of community services for older adults, establishing area agencies on such as senior meals on wheels programs and other kind of programs. It must be authorized every 5 years, and last time it was authorized was in 2020, so it'll come up again in 5 years. By reauthorization, they mean review by Congress and a review on the financing of the program, and also possible significant adjustments or additions or changes in what the program provides. Um, we're going to shift gears a little bit and talk about models of advocacy. Um, I've been doing advocacy work for 29 years, and some of this was informative for me and gave me some new ways to think about the work that I do. So I enjoyed preparing for today's lecture on this. Um, there's two theoretical guides guiding development. Um, Empowerment theory is emphasizes supporting for USDOT and supporting individuals and organizations in developing the skills to advocate for themselves. Right? The strength-based advocacy approach emphasizes that people and organizations are capable of change and growth and can serve their own as their own experts, and that the problem, not the person or organization, is the focus of the attention. So with the empowerment again, the advocate's role is to serve as a coach or mentor, not to solve the problem for the individual. In a strength-based approach, the focus is on the client's awareness of their strengths and how to use those strengths to deal with challenges. Right? So you're helping the client to identify what their resources are, what their strengths are. Systematic strategies for advocacy include, very interestingly, this idea of advocacy mapping. Um, and that incorporates, so you plot out, it's kind of a visual tool. Its common term is often called power mapping in social advocacy. And it's a visual tool used by social advocates to kind of plot out um, first who who has the sphere of of influence, which individuals, which groups have some sphere of influence, who are the stakeholders, and who are decision makers. So before you do that, you first, of course, identify what the problem is and what the goal for change is before you jump in. And then deciding what the problem is and what the goal is, then you start to identify and plot out who are the spheres of influence and from different sources. And you can see there's a wide variety of different resources to consider here. The map helps you individualize how to influence and to create change in a situation. So how policy is made in the United States. We're going to talk about this primarily as at the national level. Um, my experience, my work has been in state legislation. So some of this closely parallels what happens in many states. So the ideas for laws and policies usually starts more with constituents and with organizations, sometimes with legislators. Um, Sometimes issues come out through studies, newspaper exposés, such as the New York Times or so forth, or research that's been done in a certain field that's then shared with Congress, and then that will stimulate legislators to dig further in, to hold hearings, to investigate issues, and come up with ideas about bills and how they want to pass legislation that would affect that. But often also constituents and organizations come up with the ideas for legislation also. In days past, some of those people would be labeled special interests because they would have a special area of interest in their field, right? So for occupational therapy, the AOTA would be the organization that might originally identify, in collaboration with their members, an issue that's going on in an area of practice and some possible legislation that might help to address that issue. One that happened recently was in home care. Um, OT was not a standalone um, practice. You couldn't open a home care case in under Medicare if only OT was the service. It had to have another qualifying service available to to open the case. So many times, if OT was the only thing necessary, PT or nursing would have to open the case initially, and then eventually discharge themselves and hand it over to the OT. We wanted to change that so OT would be a qualifying service alone under home care. And say AOTA went to work on this, and it took years to get that changed. But AOTA continued to advocate and finally got that law changed so that OT is a qualifying service. So bills are drafted. This says by Congress or by people and their aides. You know, it's often, in my experience, it's often the organizations. Many of these organizations will have attorneys that they consult with or lobbyists that will help them at least do the initial rough draft of what they're thinking about, what area of law needs to be drafted, and they hand it over to the Congress, members of Congress and their aides, and that gets further researched and the bill gets refined. I used to be able to describe the bill as sheets of paper. Usually, we don't do sheets of paper anymore. Most of it is electronic, and you can actually see some bills online. Um, I can't. I'm blocking on what the site is. I think it's Thomas Jefferson or something like that. There's a site for that you can look at bills. Not easy, not an easy read. The bills are assigned to a committee that handles that area of law. So it's hard for me to do this with Congress. I can do it with the state legislature. Um, a bill that is going to amend the special education programs in New York State will be referred to the education committees in the New York State Assembly and the New York State Senate. So a similar thing would happen in Congress if something's amending the Medicare law. It would probably go to the Finance Committee and the House. It's the Senate Finance Committee and the House Ways and Means Committee at least would be those two committees. It's reviewed on by the committees and then voted on by the committee. And then the committee decides, once it's voted it out of committee, whether to send it to the full House and the Senate or whether it needs to go to another committee for further examination. Oftentimes the idea would be that it would go then to the floor of the House for a full vote at some point. This slide talks about in Bonder's book talks about the Reconciliation Committee, where it's that if the bills are passed in the Senate and the House and they have different language in the two bills, it's often then, or at least it used to be, sent to Reconciliation Committee, or what is more commonly called a conference committee is formed. And the conference committee will have representatives from both the Senate and the House. And it's basically a temporary ad hoc panel that will look at the differences between the two bills and try to work on a compromise that they can report back to House and Senate leadership. You're more likely to see this process in budget bills, which would include Medicare, quite honestly. There was 22 bill, but there's been 22 since 1974. But conference committees have dropped out of style. From 66, and there were 22 from six. Let's see, from 1995. I'm sorry, from 1995 to 1996, there were 66, and now it's down to 3 in the year 21 to 22. So there's been a significant drop in the use of conference committees. I think a lot of that is due to the polarization in our country and the polarization of politics in Congress. So lately, in my experience, a lot of small bills have great difficulty making it through this progress of getting through a committee, getting through both the Senate and the House, and then getting through a conference committee. So now what usually happens, I see a lot more of, because of the political gridlock, is that towards the end of a session, there will be a large omnibus bill, which is often huge, thousands of pages. And what lobbyists do is they push, as they know this is about to happen, they start lobbying and pushing for their bill to get pushed in, put into the omnibus bill with all these other issues. So it becomes an amalgamation of a variety of different issues all lumped together. And there's often complaints that no one's ever read the full bill when it's finally formed. But that, unfortunately, that has been how Congress has operated more lately. Enough of that, I'll get off my soapbox. So once passed by the Senate and the House, it gets sent to the president, or if it's in the state, it'll be sent to the governor to be signed or to be vetoed. Right? It's it's rare, but sometimes you'll see bills get vetoed. We haven't, in New York State, we haven't had a bill vetoed by the governor yet. I've seen a few bills get vetoed by other people. Actually, let's see. No, I don't think we've seen anything get vetoed recently. Once signed by the president or the governor, then you have to work on the rules and regulations that implement that law. And so you think of it as the law being the skeleton, the skeletal bone structure, and the rules and regulations being the muscles that help move that law along, help to implement that law and put it into more detail as how to be implemented. We just had that recently in New York State with law that was passed regarding direct access care. We then had to do regulations that would further give details as to how OTs can practice direct access care. So at each step along the way, there are opportunities for input from constituents and stakeholders can sometimes hold up legislation. So there's multiple opportunities for people to try to block legislation or block its implementation. Okay. I've also seen situations in which legislation has gotten passed that required spending money, and even though the legislation was passed, it did not. Even though the legislation was passed and it required the spending of money, the branches of government, including the budget office, can hold on to the money for a major part of the year and really delay the implementation of a program. So the advocacy work seems like it never quite stops at all. Okay, sorry about that. So the advocacy strategies include engaging and mobilizing the public for associations like AOTA and state associations, it means engaging and mobilizing our membership. Getting emails out and um, you know Twitters and so forth to alert members that this legislation is happening. Please contact your representatives um, and write them, call them, and let them know that you support or you oppose such and such legislation. It's another advocacy strategy is to get into coalitions. Um, we've done a lot of that. AOTA does that often with the PTs in speech and with other provider organizations. NYSOTA in New York State has done that with a variety of coalitions. We're in a coalition now, I believe, of 8 different professions to try to change the corporation laws in New York State. The next step is to engage decision makers. Often we're talking about legislators. Often, you have the bill sponsor that is a decision maker. You have the chair and members of the committees that are decision makers, and so on. You have to do information campaigns, get the word out. Maybe even do postings in newsletters and newspapers. And then you also have to look at reform efforts regarding legislation and monitor how the policy is being implemented. So it feels like the work is never quite finished in many ways. It's a lengthy process. The therapist role in advocacy. Well, I've kind of alluded to some of that already. The therapists have a responsibility to advocate for policies that will assist their patients. I try to, I think both AOTA and the state associations try to pursue policies that are not just benefit to the profession, but of course a benefit to the patients. So, the strategies for therapists is to establish supporting data on practice issues, educational efforts with both legislators and clients about what the policy issues are, helping clients to learn to advocate for themselves, and communicating with legislators. So I always encourage OT students to find out who their legislators are and start communicating with them while you're in school. When you settle in the community after graduation and you start practicing, if you've moved to another state or another part of the state, reestablish contact with your new legislators. Let them know that you're in their district. Let them know what your area of practice is. Let them know what your interests are in healthcare or special education or whatever, and invite them to contact you if any policy issues come up in those areas. But also get on their email list for notifications about issues that come out, and be prepared to contact them when policy issues come up that concern your clients in your profession. So it's of course difficult to monitor every bill that has implications for older adults, given the range of concerns that can be relevant to the population. There are advantages to belonging to professional associations and to specialty organizations that can monitor legislation and alert you to what's most important. And that's some of the work I do, is trying to monitor all the legislation that would affect like the elderly, things like that. Okay. We're going to talk briefly about occupational justice, a belief that everyone should have access to and support for engaging in meaningful occupations. Right? So let's go back to Jo for a moment, the video that you watched. Has she been cut off from therapy? Her family is she has been cut off from therapy. Her family is very upset, but lives far away, so they feel they cannot do anything about it. The nursing aide states that Jo used to be able to do more, about 1 month ago prior to her fall, but has declined since that fall. So I want you to brainstorm some different ideas. How can you, as an OT, advocate for services for Joe? And what steps would you take in order to advocate for Joe? Think about that. All right, we're going to shift gears and talk about meaningful occupations now. This is also a strong interest for me in working with the elderly. Um, and we'll touch on much of it today, but hopefully I'll touch on it throughout the course. All right. So the search for meaning in human life, everything we do has meaning, right? As an OT, we would never just demand someone to remove a rug. Everything needs to be a conversation for us, right? I laugh at that, because in home care, you would see a PT barrel into a person's home and tell a patient or tell a family, you've got to remove these rugs, right? I would come in and do it completely differently. The scatter rug being a potential trip hazard and a fall hazard, right? I would go in and I would talk about it and converse about it. I would try to problem solve with the family members and the patient I would educate them about the hazard, but it would be a full conversation, and they would be engaged in it, of course. Um, so engagement in meaningful occupations in later life is associated with better physical and emotional health, greater life satisfaction, a better subjective sense of well-being, a longer life, and a more positive aging experience. Um, and so the process is to identify meaningful occupations um, for the individual. So later in life is characterized by significant changes, as we'll talk about during this course, changes in physical activity, changes in roles, changes in family constellations, changes in living arrangements, and all these changes can present daunting challenges in the absence of a sense of purpose and meaning. There is a direct link between engagement in meaningful occupation and positive aging. That's certain. Ask yourselves, why do people love OT and have the strong memory of an OT doing something special for them? It is because we look at a person in many different angles. We need to know our role and when something is out of our league also at the same time. How do we get to know people? Primarily through therapeutic relationship with the client, right? Sitting down and talking to them, collaborating with them, listening to their stories, listening to their narratives, and trying to understand the meaningfulness behind those narratives. So this is a higher level of thinking course. So we need to start making sense of this and important connections that this makes. So definitions of meaning. Meaning can be thought of as an extent to which people comprehend, make sense of, or see significance in their lives, accompanied by the degree to which they perceive themselves to have purpose, mission, or an overarching aim in life, consistent with fundamental beliefs of occupational science. This whole concept of meaning. A challenge, and it's a challenge in later life because of reduction in expected roles. Right. So the questions: what role changes do older adults go through? Um, and keep in mind that children have their own lives and may have their own children. And then there's the whole concept of retirement. So a number of different authors whose names I will not try to pronounce um, have conceptualized meaning, and this is discussed in the book by Bonder. Um, First author offers a three-part definition that includes achieving purpose, expressing intentionality, and creating an internal harmony. Baumeister um, suggested that meaning represents a coherent worldview identified by each individual's choices about among the culturally and societal um, available options. And then the third approach is to describe meaning as central to understanding of occupations. Only when the task has been chosen and carried out by the person does it become an occupation. I think that's an interesting idea, an assertion that it truly becomes occupation when someone has chosen it themselves, not when it's been assigned to them. It's something for us to reflect on. Occupation and meaning. Meanings are highly individual in later life. I think that's very true. Interestingly, the next bullet point says there's a lack of clarity about what constitutes meaningful occupation in later life. But then changes in performance skills, client factors, and environmental circumstances that characterize later life require adjustment and activity. And finally, occupational value, the individual's assessment of the importance of the activity informs its meaning. So you really have the answer to the second bullet, in my viewpoint, from the fourth bullet. It's really the individual who defines what's meaningful occupation in later life. That's going to look different for each individual, and it comes down to what they value as an occupation, right? Um, Themes of meaning in later life. Two theories that Bonder mentions is Erik Erikson's concepts about development, and Bonder talks about later life degenerative stage, where individuals are working on productivity and creativity versus stagnation, being in a job where you feel like satisfaction and a dynamic life experience of productivity versus feeling stagnated in a job that's meaningless and has no has no meaning to it. And that's where you sometimes see the midlife crisis of someone quitting their job and opening a pizza shop or something like that. Um, or starting their own business, starting consultation work or something like that. The last phase that I find most interesting is ego integrity versus despair. Um, the individual um, is looking at, so this is supposed to happen after 65, but it might be later for people now because we're living to a later age. So um, the crisis here is that a sense of ego integrity while avoiding despair during this crisis utterly reflect on their life in an attempt to unify past events into a meaningful life puzzle. And they come to terms with past negative events, and when successful, individuals will experience a sense of ego integrity, where they can accept past events, see their life in a coherent perspective, and regard death as a natural and integral part of life. Despair, on the other hand, is when the individual is concerned with difficulties in accepting and finding wholeness in their life path. You know? And they often there might be high levels of regret for decisions or actions that were made during life. And that may really threaten that ego integrity and lead to a feeling of despair. Although most studies focus solely on ego integrity, several studies have shown that ego integrity and despair probably are not mere opposites of each other, that both can exist in an individual, that it's not all or one. When elderly do not feel desperate about when elderly do not feel desperate about life choices that were made, they have not necessarily achieved a full sense of ego integrity either. So they may not have that despair, but they may not also have full sense of integrity either. So it's not a black and white situation. Newgarden it focused on the acceptance of imminent death and coping with increased infirmity, dealing with care decisions, and maintaining social ties and important developmental tasks of later life. Some other theories, Levinson described two stages for older adults. The first is transition stage, during which tasks include coping with physical decline and moving from formal authority to a more informal life structure. Such as leaving the work field where there was more formalized authority and to a more informal kind of setting, like living in retirement. Second, in late adulthood, decreased concern with formal authority, status, and formal rewards, right? Right. Um, which is a stage that I'm entering into now, where rewards are different. They don't come from authority as much, or from organizations as much as it comes from meaningful engagement in purposeful activities that have more of an existential meaning to it. So Cohen, also middle-aged 35 to 65 individuals experience a midlife reevaluation, a liberation phase, and a summing up. Individuals age 75 experience an encore, an opportunity for reflection, continuation, and spirituality that lasts until death. Cohen placed particular emphasis on the importance of creativity in later life, suggesting that creativity capacity is maintained or enhanced with age. And you'll sometimes see that with people that retire, they'll want to pursue activities that are very creative in nature, painting, music, things along those lines. So the themes of meaning can be clustered into four main themes. Instrumental meanings, which has to do with self-care, and the ability, performance skills that with age, habits that may be disrupted, requiring greater attention, and activities that are endowed with important meanings, particularly in terms of the individual's perceptions about independence and dependence. The evaluative meanings, happiness, life satisfaction, subjective well-being, and quality of life. The existential meanings, such as spirituality and religion. Right? So I think that's where, for some of us as we get older, that's where our rewards come from, are more from these evaluative and existential meanings. Right? And then self-identity, to a great extent, what we are, what we do. Right? That should be a common OT statement. Right? Thus forth, the meaning of occupations in later life is the maintenance of a sense of identity. So it's really, occupation is really core to life satisfaction in later life. So discovering through occupation that it's possible to experience positive personal growth and to continue to make a contribution to the world enables elders to sustain a sense of hope, both in the present and in the future. One of the books that Erickson wrote with his wife and with others regarding this topic is called Vital Involvement. I don't know if it's still in print or not, but it goes deep into this need to discover occupations and be involved in occupations that have meaning, that are, and continue to facilitate personal growth. So what are the essential elements of occupations that provide for a sense of control? And why is control important? Because I think, you'll see this as the course goes on, that many individuals as they get older, are feeling like things are not as much in their control as they would hope for. that physical limitations, social limitations, mobility, and so forth. There's an erosion of that sense of control sometimes. So occupations can be important for this. Um, and so the essential elements is a perceived usefulness and competence, maintaining a personal control, and the ability to sustain physical activity. Individuals who are able to provide social support for others as well as receive it typically experience a greater sense of mastery, right? So being able to give that support and be able to receive that support can both be important. So how could you figure out what is meaningful to Joe? Could you do? Find out what's meaningful. So this is a cute slide. Stop thinking about what I want, what he wants, what your parents want. What do you want? Seriously, I'll get your occupational therapy profile right now. I even have an interest checklist in the trunk. Very funny. Volunteering. I'm glad this slide is here. I strongly believe in it. Um, for many people that are facing limitations in their ability to engage in competitive employment or so forth, volunteering is an awesome alternate or to gainful employment, or maybe a choice after retirement. I often encourage volunteering with adults with serious mental health conditions, but it is also an awesome option for people who have retired. Um, it, it, it's a later life occupation in which many elders participate. Think about older adults who volunteer to assist with our program projects. Why do you think they do this? It's socially engaging. It's helping others, so it gets that altruism experience. Um, it's a maintenance of identity that the individual experiences, and it gives life purpose. It gives meaning to getting up out of bed in the day and doing something, right? Um, so I think volunteering is a really great choice to encourage people to engage in if they have the means to do so. So OT theory and meaning. Think about the occupational therapy practice framework and the ICF, the National Classification of Function. Both address meaning and competence. Competence as central to the quality of life. By having a model framework that organizes the kind of questions and forms of intervention, it ensures that the therapist works with the client to establish a helpful, comprehensive, and meaningful plan. Right? Okay, the selective optimization with compensation concept suggests older adults recognize that they need to alter occupations. In doing this, they attempt to optimize function where possible. And where optimization is not possible, older adults compensate either by modifying the occupation or selecting an alternate occupation to meet needs. For example, a person who can't drive anymore may work to find alternative transportation, or they develop another way, an alternate way of getting their needs met regarding shopping and socialization and so forth. Right? Driving often provided that avenue for them to be able to shop and to socialize and to do other recreational activities. Once that's not possible, they may have to look at alternate ways to meet their needs. Um, and so hopefully we'll talk about that later on in the semester. In home care, I saw a lot of people once they couldn't drive who were trapped in their homes, trapped in their neighborhoods, trapped in their homes and socially isolated. All they were doing was talking on the phone. Um, and so we would talk about other forms of transportation and what they could do. So evaluation of There's an array of instruments that are available to assess meaningful occupations. These are some of the assessments for spirituality, the Spirituality Index of Well-Being, the Spiritual History Scale in 4 dimensions. There's life satisfaction scales in index. There's the occupational profile, the COPAM. It can be very valuable for identifying meaning, and then the engagement in meaningful activities survey. There's a wide variety of late life activities that can support well-being and meaning. Helpful occupations encourage expression and management of identity in those that connect to the elder, to the past, present, and future. Once meaningful occupations have been identified and their characteristics exposed or explored, intervention can focus on what the practice framework calls create, promote, establish, restore, maintain, modify, and prevent kind of concepts. So occupational therapy interventions emphasizing wellness, meaningful occupation, reminiscence, life review, spirituality, and promote mental health, social functioning, functional status, and physical functioning that supports meaning. The evidence, these are some resources on evidence and there's a growing body of evidence that meaningful occupation improves health and quality of life. And these are the references for today's presentation. So with that, try to stop the share, and I hope that you found this helpful, and I will see you on Monday afternoon for the second part of the day in person. All right. Take care and see you soon.